just an anime, right? But what if this were reality? I'm gonna rip the band-aid right off and say, this is not you, but this is not me either, because this is hardly anyone. This is similar to this being you in a zombie apocalypse, and this is a very small percentage of people that just happen to make it. If people were to survive being a scout, it's purely circumstantial, and not because you survived long enough to make the stupid choice to follow this guy and willingly join the scouts. Given the history of Paradis, I am surprised that joining the military isn't mandatory. Well, as far as I know, it isn't mandatory. In the anime, they mention that society frowns upon those who choose to work on the farmlands rather than joining the military, and that people mainly enlist to live up to society's expectations or hopefully graduate in the top 10 and be able to join the military police and have a cushy position in the interior. But it isn't mandatory. I mean, everyone has relied on the walls for more than 100 years before the incident, so I guess I get it. But what really surprises me is that after Shiganshina and while Maria fell, that conscription wasn't a thing. And on the notion of conscription, I'm very surprised that they actually get to choose which faction they can join after graduating from being a trainee. These all seem like privileges you wouldn't expect in times of war. I get how at first they don't recognize Titans as people and don't technically really see it as a war and more like survival, but this is still the military we're talking about. As soldiers or the fighting force, you don't really get an opinion on the matter and just have to follow orders. If this were reality, I honestly think that after graduating from the cadet corps, you would get placed into whichever division the brass sees fit. The top 10 would have, by default, been placed into the military police brigade, not because it's the most important faction, or the faction that's most dedicated to for the sake of humanity, but because the assholes that run the show want to have the best to protect them while everyone else is getting eaten. Say hello to corruption and luxury. It's a wonder why people weren't fighting tooth and nail for the top 10 position. The training arc seems really fun, until the crap hits the fan, that is. Anyone placed in the garrison regiment would be considered lucky because they're tasked with defending the walls, so technically they don't have to engage with Titans directly, and even after the Titans breach the Great Walls, they would try to minimize the casualties and just shoot a bunch of cannonballs down the wall. And people who were assigned to join the Scouts or Survey Corps would be crying to sleep at night or planning to slit their throats, because the only people that willingly join the Scouts are delusional dreamers, fools, gamblers, and people that have big egos. It's weird that these people are seen as annoying, for lack of a better word, for trying to convince Eren that joining the Scouts is a death sentence. Since if you were to pretend that this is reality and place yourself in the shoes of a citizen of Paradis, it is. And people are surprised by a person's sense of self-preservation. Don't think for a second that you're one of these heroes, or one of the people that survive even after a single mission. There's no way in hell you're gonna want to be a scout. As much as you want to do the salute and wave around the wings of freedom, there is an extremely small chance that you make it out with even a little more than a few limbs. Think twirling around mid-air in the midst of danger is fun? Chances are you probably wouldn't be able to do much after a single attack, because you'll be so fucked up from the vertigo you'll hardly even know where to look, let alone swing a blade. I know I would. Since the spinning adds to the momentum, and the momentum adds to the impact, executing the cuts in the nape of the neck, which also has to be deep enough. If it's not deep enough, it won't take a Titan out. If it's not the sweet spot behind the neck, it won't take a Titan out. Sure, you don't have to be spinning to do this, but We see a lot of spinning in this series, yo. These people be twirling like it's nothing. Maybe you'll have a better chance if you're a gymnast or a figure skater who actually receives training to combat this kind of thing. Then again, here's something interesting to note. Certain athletes, like figure skaters for example, never really get over the vertigo even after years of training. They just suck it up and get used to it and stay composed until the dizziness subsides. But for these athletes, they're still flat on the ground or move between pivotal spots. They're not flying through mid-air and spinning around hoping they don't get hit by a tree or chomped mid-flight while they're waiting for their vertigo to let up. The ODM gear is something that's practically otherworldly. Both a gift to have some form of a fighting chance against the Titans, but a curse when it doesn't work, because then your future doesn't look too promising. Never mind when your gear suddenly malfunctions or breaks. It reminds me of good old technology. It's great when it works and frustrating when it doesn't, except in this case it could get you killed. Which sounds nauseating just thinking about it. Oh, and let's not forget that it runs on gas. If you run out, you're a sitting duck and practically begging to be eaten. This is why I love anime. God, anything is possible. Let's for a second think that maybe the laws of the world works differently. Which, yeah, to a certain extent they obviously do. But if this is supposed to be Madagascar or some shit, then yeah, we can imagine that the normal rules of nature apply here. So gravity is a bitch and so is vertigo. The odds are not in your favor. Let's also not forget these things. Like, how the hell do you aim these from your hips? I guess the anime portrays it in a way that makes sense, but in reality we probably would be missing the majority of the time. The anti-personnel gear seems more accurate because you can at least point it in the direction you want to move towards. But this hip action, man, I don't know. Never mind dislodging them from wherever they stuck to, because they don't really explain that part in detail. So let's follow the previous idea that conscription is a thing and your poor soul somehow gets placed into the scouts. How do you survive? And if you really didn't want to leave the walls, you could go AWOL or commit a felony. At worst, it's the death penalty, but at best you'll face confinement, but you'll get to live. You'll be behind bars, safe, well, safer, likely underground somewhere, and you'll get a meal on top of it all. It's still better than getting thrown to the wolves, right? I guess it may be something to consider if you're desperate enough. And if you can't get out of leaving the walls, how do you survive? Well, by not being a hero, I guess. It's a slim chance, but it's not impossible. We've seen humans accomplish insane physical feats, but then again, these are few and far between. Eren and company as cadets trained for about 3 years or so. So sure, in that amount of time, you could probably acclimate to the maneuvers of the ODM gear. But if you're like me and have a terrible sense of balance, then it's off to the farm to work the land for you. Because if you can't even keep yourself upright when using the gear, you're not even considered good enough as Titan fodder. The ODM gear is powerful enough to launch a person into the air. So don't forget that this will be your new favorite position while flying Air Titan. Looks comfortable, doesn't it? But your main tool would be your legs. You got that right. With the amount of running, lunging, and jumping around these guys do, having strong legs is imperative. If you have weak knees or weak ankles, it's off to the farmlands for you. Speaking of which, the shelf life on these people's knees must be terrible. Being a farmer actually doesn't sound too bad. That way, you sacrifice your back rather than your knees. But hey, you'll probably get to live past 60. It would have been funny to have a whole episode on them just training their leg muscles to emphasize how crucial leg power is. I mean, you'd think they look more like this after all the leg work they do. Yeah, I know. Functional muscle is better than buff muscle. But any muscle means nothing against the strength of the Titans unless you have godlike luck and enough smarts to survive. Because the training never really prepares you for the actual horrors of being out in the field. So on top of it all, you have to have a great mental fortitude. so that you're not a liability on the battlefield, but also so that you don't lose it from the trauma of experiencing your comrades being eaten, and be able to think rationally under pressure. Now, this may not seem too bad since this is most people's jobs these days, but seeing people getting eaten by giant mutated people is a whole other ballgame. At least zombies are human-sized, right? Well, technically. And never mind that despite the fact that the Scouts is the only faction that really seems to be fighting for the sake of humanity, people look down on them because they're seen as wasting lives and wasting resources. So prepare to be ostracized for just being a scout, because even in the face of sheer impossibility, even the small victories are seen as a complete failure. Stay evil, kiddos. Ciao.